If a mask-wearing madman broke into your home, what would you do? A homicidal maniac is on the loose, and you never know where he might show up. I'm going to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to beat Michael Myers in Halloween.
Cats and goblins on Halloween night. Trick or treat!
These high school students are about to have a Halloween that they'll never forget. On Halloween night 1963, in the suburbs of Haddonfield, Illinois, Judith Myers and her boyfriend were making out on the couch in her living room. Her parents were out for the night, and they thought that they had the house to themselves, but they had no idea that her younger brother Michael was watching them through the window. The two went upstairs, and after creeping around the side of the house, Michael snuck in through the open back door. He grabbed a huge knife from the kitchen and slowly walked through the house towards the stairs, watching as Judith's boyfriend left through the front door. Then he snuck upstairs and put on a clown mask he found in the hall. In the bedroom, Judith was brushing her hair in the mirror, and at the last moment she turned around to see her brother standing behind her, holding the knife. She screamed out Michael, but he stabbed her over and over again for seemingly no reason at all. Michael walked outside as his parents arrived to find him with a blood-soaked knife. That makes one down, with 5 more to go. 15 years later, Michael's psychiatrist, Dr. Samuel Loomis, and a nurse arrive at Smith's Grove Sanitarium to pick Michael up for a court hearing. Dr. Loomis explains that he hopes Michael will never get out. As they pull up to the gate, Dr. Loomis gets out of the car to open it, and suddenly Michael leaps onto the roof of the car. He grabs the nurse through the window, and she drives off the side of the road. She brakes to a stop, but then Michael slams his hand into the window, shattering the glass. The nurse panics and jumps out of the car, and Michael steals the car and drives away. Dr. Loomis knows his worst fears have just come true, and Michael Myers is back on the loose. The next morning on Halloween, Laurie Strode leaves her house on her way to school. Her father reminds her to stop by the Myers' old house and leave a key under the mat for his real estate business. As she's walking down the street, she runs into Tommy Doyle, a boy she babysits. He asks why Laurie is walking that way to school, and when she explains that she's stopping at the Myers' house, Tommy warns her not to go there because the place is haunted. Despite his warning, Laurie confidently walks into the porch and leaves the key under the mat. She has no idea that Michael is right on the other side of the door, staring at her through the glass, and as she walks away, the killer watches her silently. Back at the hospital, Dr. Loomis is furious that nobody listened to his warnings about Michael. He decides to take matters into his own hands and drives away to go hunt Michael down. During class, Laurie notices someone in a car creepily watching her from across the street. The teacher calls on her to answer a question, and when Laurie looks again, the man is gone. She shakes her head in frustration, thinking she must be imagining things, with no idea it was Michael Myers. At the end of the school day, a group of boys bully Tommy, telling him the boogeyman is coming to get him. They knock Tommy down, crushing his pumpkin, and as they run away, one of the boys is grabbed by Michael, but he lets him go. The killer follows Tommy from a distance and drives down the street after him in the stolen car. He pulls up alongside Tommy and stares at him for a moment, but finally drives away. Meanwhile, Dr. Loomis uses a payphone on the outskirts of town to call the local police department and warn them to watch out for Michael. As he hangs up the phone, he notices a work truck suspiciously abandoned on the side of the road. He finds hospital gowns and the nurse's pack of cigarettes on the ground, and he knows that Michael must be the one responsible. He runs away without noticing the mechanic's dead body in the tall grass just out of sight. That makes 2 down with 4 more to go. Okay, this costume killer is out for blood, not candy. These kids might be looking forward to Halloween night, but they're about to find themselves in the middle of a real horror story. Michael wastes no time getting down to business, and he decides to keep his first slaying in the family. He doesn't seem to have any motivation for killing Judith, and choosing his own older sister as his first target shows just how evil he really is. If this is what he'll do to his own family, I'd be horrified to see what else he's capable of. Judith never could have suspected that her own brother would murder her in cold blood, but she still should have locked the doors before she went upstairs. Experts say that you should always lock up at night to protect yourself and your family. I always make sure to lock all of my doors at night. That way a crazy killer like Michael can't just waltz right in. At this age, Michael is pretty much harmless without a weapon, but unfortunately for Judith, he's able to easily get a huge knife from the kitchen drawer. When you have younger kids in the household, it's important to keep sharp objects like knives out of reach or locked in a drawer with a safety latch. That way the children can't get to them and potentially hurt themselves or somebody else. If her parents had kept the knives in a safe place, Judith might have survived the night. Michael seems to have no reaction to his sister's screams as he kills her, and when his parents find him outside, he looks like he has no idea or just doesn't even care about what he's done. This shows a disturbing level of detachment from reality. By Michael's age 6 years old, child psychology experts say that most normal children have developed an internal conscience and know the difference between right and wrong. This means that Michael should have definitely known that it was wrong to kill his sister, and indicates that he probably has several underlying psychological problems. Exposure to violence, drugs, emotional deprivation, and abuse at a young age can all stop a child from developing a functioning conscience. If Michael is experiencing any abuse at home, this could explain his apparent emotional detachment. Dr. Loomis is well aware of Michael's lack of morals, and honestly seems terrified at just the thought of having to interact with him at all. He clearly believes Michael is extremely dangerous, but despite his concerns, he foolishly only brings one nurse with him to pick Michael up at the sanitarium, and then leaves her alone in the unlocked car when they get to the gate. When transporting a dangerous criminal like Michael, there are important steps you need to take to make sure he doesn't escape. Dangerous prisoners are usually only moved under the supervision of several armed law enforcement officers. They're also supposed to be fitted with appropriate restraints like handcuffs and shackles. When moving someone as dangerous as Michael, professionals would place him in full restraints, which involve shackles around their hands, ankles, and waist. At this sanitarium, however, Michael is allowed to roam the grounds freely, which is an absolutely horrible idea even if he isn't scheduled to be picked up. Also, a professional team would use a more secure vehicle like a prison bus or even a helicopter. If it were me, I would have taken things a lot more seriously when I went to pick Michael up. Instead of putting a defenseless young nurse in danger, I would have asked to be accompanied by at least one armed officer. At the sanitarium, I would have made sure that Michael was appropriately restrained and waiting for me at the gate with several armed staff escorting him. I would do this not just for my own safety, but because if Michael were to escape, he would pose a huge threat to the local community as well. I wouldn't want any innocent people to be hurt, and also wouldn't want to face the legal consequences of letting a dangerous criminal escape under my watch. Now, Michael doesn't have a specific target in mind at first, but when Lori steps onto his front porch, she immediately puts herself at the top of the list. Lori and her family should have known better than to ever get involved with the Myers house. Even Tommy knows that messing with that house is an awful idea. Murder houses are notoriously hard to sell, so if I were Lori's dad, I wouldn't have touched that property with a 10-foot pole. Plus, if Michael ever does get out, selling his childhood home probably puts you high on his list of potential murder victims. Lori should have taken Tommy's advice and stayed far away from that house, and she might never have ended up on Michael's radar. When Lori first noticed Michael watching her at school, she should have taken action right away. It's common sense that if you see a creepy guy in a mask staring into your classroom from across the street, you need to tell your teacher immediately, even on Halloween. Even if you aren't sure about what you saw, it's always much better to play it safe than sorry, because not saying something can put everyone in the school at risk. Sure enough, Michael is able to actually grab one child right in front of the school, although luckily, he lets him go unharmed. He's also able to follow Tommy without anyone realizing, and this is all because Lori didn't speak up. I would have told my teacher right away when I noticed someone suspicious across the street. Then, if the school administrators felt that there was a real threat, they would have put the school on lockdown and informed the police. During a lockdown, students are secured in their classroom while emergency services clear the area of any threats. Hopefully, they would have caught Michael like the creep he is before this whole nightmare even had a chance to get started. If Lori had told someone, she could have saved all of her friends' lives, but she's about to learn the hard way why you should always trust your gut. Lori and her friends Linda and Annie walk home from school together and talk about their plans. Linda tells Lori about her busy schedule, and Annie complains about her boyfriend Paul. But Lori has no plans other than to babysit as usual. Just then, Michael comes down the street in his car and drives past them. Annie yells at him to slow down, and he slams on the brakes, as if he's going to get out and confront them. Luckily, he drives away, and Lori tells Annie that one day she's going to get them all in trouble. They talk about which houses they're going to be babysitting at, and make plans to see each other that night. The girls arrive at Linda's house, and she heads inside. Suddenly, Lori notices Michael creepily watching them in the distance. He stares at them for a second and then walks behind a hedge. Annie goes to confront him, but when she gets there, he's disappeared without a trace. Lori insists that she saw him, but Annie thinks she's going wacko. Annie goes inside her house, and as Lori walks away, she bumps into her friend's dad, Town Sheriff Lee Brackett. They say hello, and Lori continues home, clearly nervous now that she's alone. Lori gets to her house, but as she's walking in, she's alarmed by what sounds like a young girl needing help. She goes to investigate, but it turns out to only be a group of trick-or-treaters. She laughs at herself for still believing in the superstition, but she's about to find out that the boogeyman is actually real, and he's a lot closer than she thinks. Inside, Lori notices that her bedroom window is open. She goes to shut it and sees Michael watching her from behind the clothesline. But once again, he disappears like a ghost. Lori slams the window shut and stands there looking horrified. Suddenly, the phone rings, but when Lori answers it, it seems like nobody is there. She hangs up, but the phone rings again. This time it's Annie, and she says that she'll be there to pick Lori up at 6:30. Lori lays down in bed, anxious and totally exhausted. Okay, things just went from bad to worse for Lori. Michael is officially obsessed with her, and it's definitely not in a healthy way. But on the bright side, at least she's finally got a boy's attention. When Michael first drives by, Lori should have recognized his car right away, since she saw it earlier in the day during class. It's no Lamborghini, but if you're paying close attention, it does have a few distinguishing features, like the white wall tires and federal insignia on the door, that should have clued Lori into it being the same vehicle from before. Seeing a car like this twice is no coincidence, and would have been my first clue that I was being stalked. Now, realizing that you're being stalked is an absolute nightmare scenario. Sadly, some experts say that as many as 54% of female murder victims first reported being stalked by the person who ended up killing them. So you're going to need to take action right away if you want to survive. The first thing to do is to identify that you're being stalked by recognizing suspicious behavior happening around you. Someone following you and showing up wherever you are, and an unusual vehicle lingering near your school or home are two sure signs that you want to watch out for. When she first sees his car drive by and then catches Michael not so subtly watching her from behind a hedge, Lori should have recognized these as obvious indicators that she was being stalked and taken steps to protect herself. Experts say that it's important to avoid all communication with your stalker and never to react or respond to them in any way. Annie might not have realized it, but yelling at Michael as he drove by only instigated him more and probably ended up motivating him to go after her later that night. It's always better to ignore your stalker if you can and not add any fuel to their psychotic fire. It's also essential to take all stalking threats seriously and report them to authorities right away. Lori might not have wanted to seem dramatic by reporting a creepy guy in a mask following her on Halloween, but Michael's behavior is such a red flag that his murderous intentions should have been obvious. The next step is to seek support from family, friends, and law enforcement. The more trusted people that you tell about your stalker, the safer you will be, because they can help look out for you. I would even give them a description of Michael so that they know exactly who to look out for. A tall guy in a mechanic jumpsuit wearing an all-white Halloween mask who stomps around breathing heavily doesn't exactly blend in a quiet suburb. And hopefully someone would spot him before he could sneak up on me again. Lori is so nervous that she walks right into Annie's father, who's a trusted adult and not to mention a police officer, but bafflingly doesn't mention anything about Michael to him. I know Lori is shy and awkward and Mr. Brackett honestly comes off kind of creepy, but seriously? There couldn't have been a better person for Lori to run into at that moment, and she walks away like she didn't just see Michael Myers, casually deciding which one of her friends to stab first. Needless to say, I would have given Mr. Brackett a description of Michael and his car and let the boys in blue take care of him. Hopefully they would have pulled him over somewhere in town and given him a lesson on the finer points of 1970s policing techniques. Lori notices that her bedroom window is open despite the rainy weather, and when she goes to close it, she sees Michael standing in her backyard. Now, if you find yourself in this scenario, the first thing you're going to want to do is quickly change your underwear. After that, you can start to take more strategic action. Experts advise that during a home invasion, you want to avoid all confrontation and quickly and quietly get as far away from the threat as possible or hide in a secure location if you can't leave. Once you're able to, you need to contact the police and let them know what's going on. Most burglars will try to avoid any contact with you, but since Michael is standing right out in the open, it's safe for Lori to assume that he's not there to steal her mother's jewelry. Instead of talking to Annie on the phone, Lori obviously should have called the police, but she hasn't been making the smartest decision so far, so why expect her to start now? Later, Lori walks to the corner and waits for Annie. She's still worried about Michael and looks around nervously. Finally, Annie arrives and they drive off together to their babysitting jobs. Meanwhile, Dr. Loomis goes to the cemetery to visit the grave of Judith Myers. But when he gets there, he sees the gravestone has been dug up and stolen. Now he's sure that Michael is back in town. Lori and Annie drive through the neighborhood, and suddenly Michael starts following them in his stolen car. Luckily, he leaves them alone when they see Annie's dad outside the local hardware store. He tells them that someone broke in and stole Halloween masks, rope, and several knives. Just as the girls are driving away, Dr. Loomis walks up and introduces himself to the sheriff. He tells the sheriff that they need to talk about something very important. While he waits, he has no idea that Michael drives by just out of sight. That night, Lori and Annie arrive at their babysitting houses, with Michael following right behind them. Lori gets out of the car and goes inside Tommy's house, while Annie parks in the driveway of Lindsay's house across the street. Michael gets out and watches from behind a tree as Annie heads in and the parents leave. Now he knows that Annie and Lindsay are all alone. Dr. Loomis and the sheriff arrive at the abandoned Myers house to search for any clues. Inside, they find the body of a recently killed dog. The sheriff doesn't believe a man could have done it, but Dr. Loomis knows it was Michael. They continue upstairs and into the room where Michael killed his sister. Just as the doctor is explaining how it happened, a piece of the gutter falls off and shatters the window, scaring him so badly that he pulls out his gun. He tells the sheriff that he's so afraid of Michael because he was his psychiatrist for 15 years, and even though he tried to help him, Michael is simply pure evil. Even as a 6-year-old child, he showed no emotions or sense of right and wrong. The sheriff asks what they should do, and Dr. Loomis says he's going to stay at the house and wait for Michael to come back. He tells the sheriff not to warn the rest of the police officers since it's Halloween night, and there would be too many false reports. The sheriff agrees and says he'll come back in an hour. Okay, things have seriously taken a turn for the worse, and I'm not talking about Michael's aggressive driving. Lori and Annie are too busy smoking a joint to notice, but Michael is right behind them and riding their bumper through the whole neighborhood. Now, if they had noticed their terrifying tailgater, there are a few things they could have done to shake him. First, you want to start driving in a way that doesn't make sense, like making 4 right turns in a row. If the car is still behind you, now you know that you're being followed. In that case, you need to drive to a public area with lots of people around and contact the police as soon as you can. Luckily for the girls, they're safe when they run into Annie's creepy dad at the hardware store. This would have been another perfect time for Lori to mention the stalker who's been following her all day, but instead, she sits there making weird faces at the sheriff while he tells them that a burglar stole Halloween masks, rope, and knives. Lori needs to smarten up and start taking things more seriously before it's too late. When the girls arrive at their babysitting jobs, they're both left alone in a big house with just the kid and no adult supervision. They may think this is a great opportunity to get into trouble, but their isolation gives Michael an even better opportunity to start picking them off. Being home alone at night can actually be scary and even dangerous, but there are a few easy things you can do to keep yourself safe. The most obvious thing to do is always lock your doors and windows. We've already seen how Michael likes to find creative ways to make an entrance, so I would have gone through each and every room in the house, making sure that everything was locked up and there was no way for him to get in. It's also important to get to know your neighbors in case of emergencies. Tommy and Lindsay's parents should have left a note at the house with at least 1 or 2 of the neighbors' names, phone numbers, and addresses, and let them know that they'd be out for the night and a babysitter would be watching their kids. That way, if anything were to happen, Lori and Annie would be able to quickly get in touch with a responsible adult. Lori's going to find out the hard way why this is so important to do. At the Myers house, they're given some more insight into Michael's disturbed personality when Dr. Loomis and the sheriff discover the half-eaten body of a neighborhood dog. Cruelty to animals is one of the primary warning signs of several different psychological disorders, and FBI research shows that almost all serial killers have a history of animal abuse. If it wasn't already obvious that Michael is still dangerous, it definitely is now. The doctor's got the right idea when it comes to wanting to stop Michael before he kills again, but his plan to do that could honestly use some work. I'm using the word plan loosely here, because really what the doctor wants to do is just sit around the house all night and wait for Michael to show up. It's not the worst idea, but if you're determined to stay in one place all night, why not try to do something to lure Michael in and speed the process up a little bit? Being his psychiatrist, Dr. Loomis should know Michael better than almost anyone, and he should know exactly what to use as bait to catch him. He's clearly hungry since he's resorted to eating dogs, and he's been eating hospital food for the last 15 years. So I would have left a Big Mac and fries on the front porch, which he would have never been able to resist. I'm also not sure about the doctor's logic when it comes to not informing the rest of the police department. He argues that it will cause too many false reports, but to me, it seems very important to have officers checking for suspicious people when a known killer's on the loose and kids are all over the streets. He's trying his best, but when this nightmare is over, Dr. Loomis should seriously consider an early retirement. Back at Tommy's house, he and Lori are reading through his comic book collection. Tommy asks Lori about the boogeyman, but the phone rings before she can answer him. Annie calls and says she has big news for Lori, but suddenly the family dog walks in growling angrily. Annie thinks he's barking at her, but the dog is actually upset because he can sense Michael outside. While Lori and Annie are talking, Tommy peeks out the window and sees Michael watching from across the street. He runs to tell Lori that the boogeyman's outside, but when she looks, Michael is gone. Across the street, Michael watches Annie through the kitchen window. He knocks down a hanging plant, but hides just before Annie sees him. Suddenly, the family dog shows up and barks at Michael, but Michael kills him before anyone comes to check what's going on. Lori and Tommy are sitting on the couch watching scary movies, and Tommy asks her again about the boogeyman. Lori insists that there's no such thing, but Tommy is convinced that he saw him outside. She promises that she'll keep him safe, and the two of them go to make a jack-o'-lantern. Back at Lindsay's house, Annie goes to the laundry room out of the backyard to wash her clothes. She tries to turn on the lights, but the bulb is dead. Suddenly, the door snaps shut behind her. Annie looks and doesn't see anyone, but Michael is there watching her from the shadows. He pulls the door shut and locks her in. Annie bangs frantically on the door and calls out for Lindsay, but she doesn't hear. Luckily, Annie's boyfriend Paul calls the house looking for her, so Lindsay runs outside and finds Annie stuck in the laundry room window. She helps her get out, and they run back inside. Paul calls Annie again, and while they're talking, she has no idea that Michael is watching her through the back door. Annie asks Lindsay to go with her to pick up Paul, but Lindsay doesn't want to go. Instead, Annie brings her across the street to stay with Tommy and Lori, while Michael is watching them the whole time. Annie goes back to her car, but the door is locked, and she realizes she forgot her keys. She goes inside the house to get them, and when she gets back to the car, she gets in without noticing that the door was mysteriously unlocked. Annie notices that the windows are fogged up, and just as she's starting to realize that something's wrong, Michael bursts from the back seat and grabs her by the neck. She fights back as best as she can, but Michael easily overpowers her and snaps her neck. That makes 3 down, with 3 more to go. Okay, Michael here is all bite and no bark, and there's only one cure for this sick puppy. When Lester the dog starts going crazy, Annie thinks it's because he doesn't like her, but she has no idea that he's actually trying to protect her from Michael. Dogs are actually able to sense danger and untrustworthy people much faster than humans can. This is due to their incredible senses of sight, hearing, and smell. Some experts say that dogs can even smell the change in pheromones given off by people with bad intentions. They're called man's best friend for a reason, and if your dog seems to be going crazy with no explanation, you better pay attention, because they just might be trying to save your life. Across the street, Tommy tries his best to warn Lori, but since he's a kid, she refuses to listen. I completely understand not believing a little kid every time he cries boogeyman, but Lori has already run into a masked man with a disappearing act several times today, so you would think she'd be a little more open to hearing Tommy out. He's been watching horror movies all night no problem, so he definitely isn't just scared of his own shadow. I would have asked Tommy more about what he saw and tried to warn Annie before it was too late. When Annie gets in her car, she has no idea that Michael is waiting for her in the back seat and makes a few crucial mistakes that end up costing her life. Her first warning is the door suddenly being unlocked when she returns with the keys. If the car door was just locked when she checked it a moment ago, she should have gotten suspicious that something was wrong right away when she came back and it was open. It's always important to take a look in your back seat, especially at night, in case someone is in there waiting for you. When she gets in her car, Annie notices that the windshield is fogged up, as if someone inside has been breathing heavily under a rubber mask for several minutes. And just when she realizes that there is someone else in there, Michael emerges from the back seat and starts to choke her out. This is an absolute worst case scenario, but if you're ready to fight, there's actually a small chance that you might survive. If you're being choked, the most important thing to do is clear your airway, and you do this by breaking your assailant's grip. Self-defense experts say you need to focus all of your body weight against the attacker's hands and arms, causing their grip to loosen and giving you a chance to breathe. I would have tried this first, and if I could get Michael's grip to break, I'd be able to turn around and start punching him right in his expressionless face. If that didn't work, I would have tried to start the car and crash it into Tommy's house, since this would hopefully fling Michael off me and at least get Lori's attention so she can call for help. Without a plan, Annie doesn't stand a chance and quickly ends up another one of Michael's victims. I've heard of annoying backseat drivers, but Michael just might be the worst of all. Tommy peeks across the street and sees Michael carrying Annie's dead body inside the house. He screams to Lori that the boogeyman is outside, but when she looks, Michael has disappeared. Lori gets very upset and threatens to turn off the TV and send them to bed if Tommy doesn't cut it out. At the Myers house, Dr. Loomis watches as a group of kids dare each other to go inside. He scares them off, and suddenly the sheriff grabs his shoulder, giving him a bad shock. The sheriff says that he's starting to doubt Michael Myers is really there, but Dr. Loomis insists that he's definitely coming, and the sheriff reluctantly agrees to stay with them for the night. Meanwhile, Linda and her boyfriend Bob arrive at Lindsay's house and are shocked to find it totally empty and dark. Linda calls out for Annie, but when nobody answers, they figure that the house must be empty and start making out. Linda calls Lori to see where Annie is, but Lori says she hasn't heard from her, and they think she must be with her boyfriend Paul. Linda and Bob think that they have the house to themselves for the night and decide to go upstairs, but they have no idea that Michael is watching and he has other plans. After they're done, Bob heads to the kitchen to get them some beers and leaves Linda alone in the bedroom. He grabs some beers from the fridge when suddenly he hears the back door open. Bob goes to investigate, thinking it must be one of his friends playing a prank on him. But when he opens the door, he finds out that the truth is much worse. Michael blasts out from the closet and grabs Bob by the throat, holding him up against the wall. Bob tries to fight back, but Michael lifts him right off his feet, clearly much stronger than he is. Suddenly, the murderer pulls out a kitchen knife and stabs him through the stomach, with the knife going so deep that it pins Bob up against the wall. Michael stares at him for a minute, tilting his head in a creepy and childlike way, admiring his handiwork. That makes 4 down, with 2 more to go. Upstairs, Linda lays in bed still waiting for Bob. She has no idea that he was just violently murdered right in the kitchen. Suddenly, the bedroom door swings open, and Linda sees Michael standing there wearing a bedsheet to look like a ghost. She thinks it must be Bob, but starts to get creeped out when he won't answer. Linda gets up to call Lori, but Michael slowly walks up behind her and strangles her to death with the phone cord. That makes 5 down, with 1 more to go. Lori can hear her choking, but thinks it must be a prank call from Annie. She tries to call her back, but nobody picks up the phone. Starting to get worried, Lori goes upstairs to make sure that the kids are still safe in bed. Meanwhile, Dr. Loomis notices his stolen car parked around the corner from the Myers house, and knows that Michael must be out prowling around. Okay, Michael just brought a whole new meaning to giving up the ghost. Linda and Bob thought that they were in for the night of their lives, but little did they know it would turn out to be the night of their deaths. When Bob is alone in the kitchen and hears the back door creak, he makes the classic mistake of going over to investigate. Sure enough, he falls right into Michael's trap. Michael is able to lift Bob right off his feet, showing that he's extremely strong. This means it would definitely not be a good idea to try to beat him in a fair fight. Luckily, the kitchen is full of ordinary household items that can be turned into weapons if you need to. If I were Bob, I would have grabbed a frying pan to defend myself, since I can use it to attack and block before I went to check anything out. That way, if Michael tried to grab me, I would at least stand a fighting chance. Linda has even more of an opportunity to fight back or escape than Bob, but ends up dead just as quickly. Now this should go without saying, but never turn your back on a creepy guy wearing a bedsheet standing silently in your bedroom doorway, even if you do think it's just your dorky boyfriend. When she started to get uncomfortable, Linda should have gotten ready for a fight. She should have thrown a lamp at Michael to try to knock him out, or waited for him to lunge at her and then dodged out of the way, quickly running for the door and escaping out of the house. Instead, Linda tries to call Lori, but Michael decides to sign her up for a new phone plan, and the first bill is a real killer. Lori walks downstairs and decides to check across the street at Lindsay's house to find out exactly what's going on. She cautiously walks up to the dark house and tries the front door, but it's locked. She knocks and calls out for Bob and Linda, but nobody answers. Lori heads around the back of the house and finds the entrance there wide open. She walks slowly inside, getting more and more creeped out with each step. She tries again and again to call out for her friends, but the house seems completely empty. Lori creeps upstairs and slowly makes her way to the bedroom. She opens the door, and that's when she sees Linda's dead body lying in bed underneath the gravestone of Judith Myers. Lori backs up, horrified, and suddenly Bob's body swings down from the ceiling. She screams and falls backwards, only to see Annie's body in the closet. Terrified, Lori runs out of the room, completely freaking out. Suddenly, Michael slashes at her from the shadows, and she tumbles over the railing down the stairs. She gets up and limps to the door, but can't get it open, and Michael follows slowly behind her. Lori runs to the kitchen and locks herself in, hoping to buy some time. She tries to escape out the back door, but Michael blocked it closed with a rake. She desperately tries to get it open, and suddenly Michael bashes his arm right through the kitchen door. He rushes in brandishing his huge knife, but Lori manages to break the glass and makes it out just in time. She runs to the neighbor's house screaming for help, but they close the blinds and shut off the lights when they see her, probably thinking it's some kind of Halloween prank. Lori runs back across the street to Tommy's house, but the door is locked and she's lost the keys. She slams on the door and screams out for the kid, and finally gets his attention by throwing a potted plant at his bedroom window. Tommy sees her and slowly makes his way to unlock the door, as Michael bears down on her from across the street. Finally, he opens the door and lets Lori in, and she slams it shut and locks it behind them. Lori orders Tommy to run upstairs and lock the bedroom door. She rushes to the phone to try to call for help, but the line is dead. Just then, Lori notices an open window, and she knows that Michael's inside the house. She falls to the floor begging him to stop, and grabs a long needle from her sewing kit to defend herself. Suddenly, Michael jumps out from behind the sofa and barely misses Lori with his knife. She jabs him in the neck with the sewing needle, and Michael stumbles back and falls to the floor motionless. Lori limps upstairs to get Tommy and Lindsay. She tells them that they need to take a walk, but they'll be safe now because she killed the boogeyman. Tommy says you can't kill the boogeyman, and just at that moment, Michael appears in the hallway behind them, proving him right. everyone screams, and Tommy and Lindsay lock themselves in the bedroom again. Lori runs down the hall to another room and opens the window to make it look like she escaped that way before circling back and hiding in the closet. The plan doesn't work as she hoped, and Michael starts trying to break into the closet where Lori is hiding. She sits there in the fetal position, completely terrified, until Michael finally bursts in. At the last second, Lori grabs a wire hanger and straightens it out, jabbing it right into Michael's eye. He staggers back and drops his knife. With no time to lose, Lori quickly picks it up and stabs it deep into his chest. Walking out of the closet, she sees Michael has collapsed to the floor, looking gravely injured, and Lori sneaks around him, still holding the knife. Okay, that was a serious showdown. Lori took on Michael twice and won, but like Tommy said, you can't kill the boogeyman. Lori is smart to enter the house cautiously, but since she's suspicious that there might be danger, she should have brought a weapon. Being a young boy, Tommy most likely has a baseball bat in his garage, and that would have been perfect to take with her in case of a fight. At the sight of 3 of her friends' dead bodies, it's understandable that Lori's first instinct is to run out of the room. But when you think about it, that is exactly what Michael is expecting her to do. Instead, I would have quickly locked myself in the bedroom and tried to escape out of the window, hopefully avoiding Michael, who I know is hiding somewhere in the house. When Lori manages to escape, the people at the neighbor's house refuse to help her. This is a classic example of the bystander effect, where people choose not to help someone in need because they think that someone else will and don't want to get personally involved in the problem. To overcome this, Lori should have singled her neighbor out and asked them for help directly, instead of just screaming for help in general. Making that serious connection with the other person could have convinced them that she wasn't just playing a Halloween prank, and gotten her some help much sooner. Even if she couldn't get help at that particular house, I would have kept trying at other neighbors' places instead of leading Michael directly back to the kids. Eventually, one of them will do the right thing and help you out, and at the speed Michael walks, you should have plenty of time. The final mistake that Lori makes is not confirming her kill on Michael when she has the chance. After he got up from the first sewing needle to the neck, Lori should have known that he was liable to play a possum again. 1 or 2 more jabs with the kitchen knife while he was down might have been just the insurance that Lori needed, but even that might not have been enough to take him down. Luckily, Dr. Loomis is on his way and packing heat, and he's aiming to write Michael a prescription for 6 doses of 38 Special. Checking on the kids, Lori gets Tommy and Lindsay to come out of hiding, instructing them to go down the street to the neighbor's house and call the police. They leave, and Lori sits in the hallway collecting her thoughts, when Michael suddenly rises up behind her yet again. Outside, Dr. Loomis sees the 2 kids run out of the house screaming, and knows this must be where Michael is. Back upstairs, the killer springs out behind Lori and grabs her by the throat. As they struggle, she rips off his mask, finally showing the human face underneath. Dr. Loomis rushes upstairs just in time, and as Michael is putting his mask back on, he shoots him with his revolver. He follows the murderer into the bedroom and unloads the rest of his bullets right into his chest. Michael falls from the balcony and lands in the yard, hopefully dead for real this time. Overwhelmed by what's happened, Lori remarks that it really was the boogeyman, and Dr. Loomis agrees. Suddenly, when he looks back outside, Dr. Loomis realizes with horror that Michael is gone once again. Lori can tell from his reaction what's happened, and breaks down crying hysterically. Despite everything they've tried, Michael Myers is still alive, and they never know when he'll come back for revenge. But what do you think? How would you beat Halloween? Let me know with a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and subscribe. Check out the Hounds of Beat playlist for more videos like this. And don't forget that from now on, we'll be uploading on Wednesdays and Saturdays. Until next time, have a damn good day.